In my speech opening the conference, I indicated that a key theme of this Conference of Council is to embrace change and diversity, with a particular focus on cultural diversity. And as we heard in the previous session, that's not just because it's a good thing to do, but also because it makes business sense. The Law Institute of Victoria has been in operation for more than 153 years, yet I am the first LIV president with an Asian background. And when we look around the profession in Victoria, and probably throughout Australia, we quickly see there are no Asian judges and no Asian senior counsel. In the medium to large firms, there are only a small proportion of partners with an Asian heritage. So we need to address the barriers to diversity, as we talked about in the previous session. However, if we really do engage with Asia, it's obvious that it's not just about promoting people with an Asian heritage, but also about building the wider cultural awareness in the profession. A lot of work has already been done on how Australia can seek to achieve an Asian-capable skill set, workforce and mindset. The Australian in Asian Century White Paper, released by the Federal Government in October 2012, has outlined an ambitious roadmap with a series of recommendations to foster greater opportunities, cross-border innovation, through reducing barriers to trade and investment. In this session, Mr. John McCarthy will first outline the political and strategic challenges and opportunities for Australia. And then we'll hear from our panel, comprising Jenny McGregor, Kelvin Tam and Clea, who will discuss the difficult questions of how practitioners can build capabilities to encourage and foster business relationships with Asia. Let me introduce our guest speakers and panellists. John McCarthy is the National President of the Australian Institute of International Affairs and current Chair of the Australia-India Council. He has served as the Australian Ambassador to Vietnam, Mexico, Thailand, the United States, Indonesia and Japan, and as High Commissioner to India. He's also served in Damascus, Baghdad and Vientiane. From 1994 to 1995, John was Deputy Secretary in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Canberra. He is a Barrister at Law and still continues to practice today. Jenny McGregor is Founding Chief Executive of AsiaLink at the University of Melbourne. She is also the Executive Director of the Asia Education Foundation. Under Jenny's leadership, AsiaLink has become Australia's largest non-government centre for the promotion of Australia-Asia relations, with an annual budget of over $10 million and activities spanning education, the arts, health, corporate and public programs. Jenny has also been a member of the boards of the APEC Women's Business Advisory Committee and the Maya Foundation's Beyond Australia Committee. Prior to taking up her AsiaLink appointment in 1990, Ms. McGregor worked as a political advisor and senior manager in Australia's federal and state governments. Kelvin is a partner at the firm Hunt & Hunt. He has significant experience in the corporate and commercial area with a particular focus on mergers and acquisitions. He has previously practiced in Hong Kong, advising on Hong Kong and China-related transactions, including advising Chinese enterprises on listing on the Australian Securities Exchange, advising Chinese enterprises on acquisitions in Australia, and advising Australian companies on establishing businesses and setting up joint ventures in China. Clea is the Director of the Asia Pacific Desk, Corporate and Commercial Banking at ANZ. The desk supports Australian companies doing business with or expanding into Asia. Prior to returning to Australia in 2011, Clea worked for ANZ in China for 5 years as Head of Personal and Business Banking and delivered ANZ's Platinum sponsorship of the Australian Pavilion at the Shanghai World Expo 2010. Before joining ANZ, Clea was a corporate lawyer with Montreal Ellison City. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming John first.
Look, just to give you some sort of picture of what the sort of dynamics are, I think, internationally for Australia over the next 15 or 20 years, because I think we do have to look ahead. I want to talk a little bit first about what are the global trends, and then talk about the region. And I say 15 to 20 years ahead. It's a good way to look ahead. It's a good way to plan. You need to look that far into the future. But what I do want to emphasise is there is always going to be the impact of game changers that haven't really been foreseen. For example, people thought there could be a real deterioration in the status of the Soviet bloc, but people didn't really foresee a collapse of the sort that occurred in the late 80s. Equally, there were those that saw a severe economic downturn a few years ago, but few saw the extent of the GFC. So you do have to sort of try and build into any calculations the capacity for things really to change radically for unforeseen reasons. Look, if you want to look at the main trends, I would suggest that it is worth digging out a paper put out by the national intelligence agencies in the United States called Global Trends 2030. It involved all the intelligence agencies consulting with universities in Australia, consulting with other governments to put together really a very good document on main trends for the next 15 or 20 years globally. But look, just looking at these global trends, and I want to run by it quickly. First of all, you're going to see an emerging middle class globally. So you've got 1 billion in the middle class now, and you've got to sort of define what is the middle class, because there's the middle class as you might define it in Australia, and there's the middle class as you might define it in India, and they're different. But from roughly about 1 billion in the middle class now, you're going to see by 2030 between 2 and 3 billion, according to definition, which is going to make huge differences in demand factors in terms of the global economy. It's going to make a huge difference to consumption. It's going to make a huge difference to education as an industry. And dare I say it might well make a huge difference to the legal profession. That's the first thing. I think the second point that you really have to watch very closely is demography. You are seeing major changes taking place in terms of global demography. You are seeing not only the rise of populations in countries such as India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Colombia, Mexico, and so on. But what you are seeing is, in those countries, the median age as much younger than some of the advanced countries, such as Japan, Europe, China. And that too is going to be very, very important, because it means that you are going to have, in those countries, a much greater proportion of the population in the workforce as opposed to being dependents. And that too is going to have a major impact on where power lies in those countries. Not only economic power, but to some degree political power, and power which relates to security. You're going to see an increase in immigration, and it's not necessarily going to be all sort of refugee driven. There will be an attraction within countries for people to go to the cities. And urbanisation, you had a situation where something in the 1950s, about 30% of the global population lived in cities. Around now, it's about 50%, it'll be 60% or more by 2030. But urban centres will become more significant in the life of nations. And the other aspect, I think, which you will increasingly see is major urban centres playing a more significant role in the external relations of their country. You're already seeing mayors becoming international figures. I think the third trend is diffusion of power. Now, you're already seeing that with the growth of China, with the growth of India. These countries are becoming more powerful. But you're also having other estimates of what actually constitutes a powerful country. And the game changers are, of course, what can happen in the global economy. I think that goes without saying when we've seen what's happened in the last 4 years or so. Differences in governance. There is a governance gap, as they say, in countries like China's, where development is going faster than the skills that are required to actually govern a country, the democratization of a country. And that's very much the case in a country like China. It is also a case in the Gulf, for example. And I think the final issue that really one has to look at is stability, regional stability, particularly, as well as global stability. But I think the real issue that we have to look at over the next 15 years is what is actually happening in particular regions, and the impact of destabilisation to go global. Those game changers need to be watched against the background of the main trends. There's a need for Australia to make a huge number of domestic changes to adapt to what is happening in Asia, particularly China and India, but not just those countries. Government policy, the way we make foreign policy, needs some shifting. I'll give you an example. We will have had by early this year 3 major documents on external policy. One is the White Paper, which largely dealt with what we need to do domestically from an economic and educational perspective. Then you have the National Security Paper put out by the PM a couple of months ago, which was quite a good document, written obviously by very different people those who wrote the White Paper. And then we're going to have a defence document put out next year, which will be written by a different crowd of people altogether. And there is an interlocking in all this, in which really people tried to focus as a national priority on what we should be doing externally over the next 10 to 15 years. I think that would be an excellent idea. But I think what is very important for this country is to move away from silos, and by that I mean the fact that departments don't talk to each other enough in Canberra, but also there isn't enough consultation between Canberra and the rest of the community. Just looking very briefly at what our priorities should be on Asia, I think, and indeed globally, from this I'll be quick. The first and the real concentration has to be on those countries which are close to us, because that's where we really make a difference. That's obviously the Pacific, and I think you would also have to say Indonesia. Indonesia is going to change by 2030, according to a number of estimates, not just the Global Trends paper. It could be the 6th biggest economy in the world, and so our relationship is going to be with a very different sort of country to that which we've been used to dealing with for the last 20 or 30 years. And we have to go beyond understanding Indonesia as a sort of troublesome neighbour, which has, where we have these absurd problems between the two countries. We've got to get beyond all that stuff to really have a major economic relationship with a major power. We've been trying for 3 or 4 decades. We've never quite got it right. The next area is we've really got to try and work out where we stand on what is emerging as a multipolar Asia. We've got to first of all understand what is going to happen in Asia. And there are a number of options ranging, at either side. Status quo with the Americans still remaining the major power. That can't happen with China. Other end of the spectrum, the Sinicization of Asia. That's not in our interest, and I don't think it's likely to happen. So you really have to look at, what might happen in the middle of that. And I think the 2 options are a multipolar Asia, which is basically benevolent, where there are some structures for countries really to try and understand each other, including a very strong bilateral set of dealings between China and the United States. Also, countries such as Japan, India, Indonesia and Russia all have to have a major say in what's happening. I think we too should have a say, but we shouldn't overestimate our power. We are a middle power. We're not a major power. And I think that means that our say in the region is going to be dictated to some degree by what others decide, whatever we might actually think. The third point I'd just like to make is, having said that we're not a major power, we're a middle power, I think we have to understand we are actually a middle power. And that means that our say and our policies should not just be towards Asia and Pacific. We do have interests elsewhere. We have major mining interests now in Africa and increasingly so in Latin America. And these are actually becoming more important continents economically. They are growing in some countries, and I've pointed to some of these countries in both those continents that are going to become second-tier economic powers. You can't just dismiss other global organisations as being a waste of time and all a bit tiring and, we're an important country, we needn't bother about them. I think it's probably appropriate that I leave it to others to have their say, so thank you.